stretched the range of the electric guitar with a roaring riff that still reverberates to this day. His influence resounds in the playing of every guitarist schooled in his licks, and many of his leading disciples have paid tribute to Jimi Hendrix, either by covering his songs or imitating his style. Still, his ventures into uncharted sonic territory remain groundbreaking. With an outrageous personal style, Hendrix is revered as the most important instrumentalist in rock history.
He wasn't just a blues guitarist, just a rock guitarist, just a jazz guitarist. He could play all those styles, and then he found a style that assimilated all of them.
He differed from the top acts at that time. And I mean, his sound was so different than the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. They didn't really care where his music was going chart-wise. It was more trying to reach people's souls and give them some sort of direction. But where did his management want to take him? Where did he creatively want to go? That was all up in the air.
If you want to use the phrase, what if, Hendrix is your man, because we'll never know. He only did a handful of records the way he wanted, and then he died. But what's interesting is it keeps him forever trapped in amber. He can't grow old. He is always the innovative, young, artistically restless Jimi Hendrix.
While he is worshipped by many as the greatest guitar player, Hendrix was a wildly innovative man eager to escape the shackles of interpretation. The straight musical trends and social contradictions of his time did not stop him from becoming one of the highest-paid rock stars of the 60s. His raw talent and restless fascination with the expressive power of sound reveal a visionary man who only wanted to create. His ever-expanding musical style was rooted in soulful improvisation that stretched out in directions he never got to pursue. Despite the setbacks he encountered on his journey, his iconic imprint on popular culture stands undiminished, and his concomitant record sales continue throughout the world. With exclusive footage, live performances, and interviews from people who've met him, we revisit the iconic moments and cautionary stages of Hendrix's catapulting rise to fame. Many guitarists have imitated his technique. Few have mastered it, while none at all have matched it. His limitless influence on modern music and popular culture stands undiminished as his record sales continue throughout the world.
If you think of rock and roll is what it is, it's like a placid pool. Hendrix is like throwing a stone or a brick into that pool. Splash, and the waves just keep on rolling out.
He was a writer, no question about it. He wrote, but as he played, he was writing. It all came from that head.
And he was the kind of musician that carried his guitar around with him like a third arm. He hardly ever didn't have his guitar with him. He would have slept with it if he could.
You can almost say there's before Hendrix and after Hendrix in rock and roll. Certainly, before Hendrix, no one took lengthy guitar solos. After Hendrix, there was a period of a good 10 years where lengthy guitar solo and display of raw virtuosity was considered great. And also Hendrix gave birth to jazz rock, because Hendrix's playing was so out there, was getting so and so far removed from just 4/4 rock and roll with 3 chords, that you'd never have had Larry Coryell's 11th House and the Mahavishnu Orchestra and all these crazy out there bands without Hendrix laying the groundwork before. There was no interbreeding of jazz and rock on such a regular basis, particularly by an electric guitarist before Hendrix.
In his short career, Hendrix revolutionized most elements of guitar playing in his quest to expand the limits of rock and express his unique sonic vision. From feedback to reverb to scratching his pick across the strings and using the wah-wah pedal, he used and reinvented the sounds of the guitar in every possible way. His irrepressible genius as an instrumentalist radically redefined the expressive potential and sonic palette of the electric guitar, composing repertoires of songs from hard rockers to mellow ballads. Hendrix changed the face of rock music, becoming one of the most influential and visionary musicians of his era.
Jimi's playing was different in mostly one respect. He was able to create on the spot sounds that were appealing to the ear without any sheet music or other to read from. He did what came to his ear and his mind, which was pleasing.
Hendrix is really underrated as a songwriter. Some of his stuff is pure poetry, and a lot of it's that psychedelic out there stuff. And there's a reason for this. A lot of it is due to Hendrix's love of science fiction and the abnormal. The weirdest one, which most people don't know about, is he was influenced by cartoons. And if you listen to some of his playing, that's what inspired it. And the best example, if you listen to the instrumental break on All Along Watchtower, he's imitating the cartoons when the animal's falling off the cliff and it hits a tree branch. It goes blah, 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 blah. That's what he's imitating. And when you think about it, his imagination was boundless, long before psychedelics, long before he became a rock star.
Learning his trade as a guitarist in rhythm and blues bands and possessing a jazz man's commitment to collective improvisation, Hendrix gave rock music a complete new makeover in the late 1960s. His signature guitar was a right-handed Fender Stratocaster, flipped over and restrung for his lefty technique. His dexterous guitar playing and lyrical inventiveness came from a futuristic imagination that was shaped in the magic of his live performances.
There's little doubt Jimi Hendrix is recognized today as the greatest guitarist in rock and roll history, with people like Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, Duane Allman being, at best, a distant second. And I think what sets Hendrix so far apart from those guys is he was influenced by a much wider musical palette. Hendrix isn't strictly a blues rock guy. Yes, what he did sort of defined blues rock playing, and he came out of R&B, and he'd been in bands with Curtis Knight. He backed up Wilson Pickett for a while, but Pickett fired him because he would get bored playing something like one of Wilson Pickett's biggest hits, In the Midnight Hour. Lovely, standard kind of R&B changes. And Hendrix would get bored, so he'd throw in this crazy solo out of nowhere. When you're Little Richard, when you're Wilson Pickett, when you're the Isley Brothers, and you've had hit records, their audience, when they go see you, want to hear the record as it was. And Hendrix was not like that. He was a brilliant risk taker and an improviser, but it eventually would get him fired from these R&B bands.
Mid-60s, he had gone through a wide variety of R&B bands. A lot of the problems, and he got fired a lot of the time, was because he had upstaged the main performer, especially Little Richard, who wanted the spotlight on him all the time there. From that point, after getting fired from Little Richard's band, Jimmy got some notoriety, and one of rock and roll's greatest bass players, Chas Chandler of the Animals, came through one day and heard about him. Came in and sat at this club, and the first time he saw Jimmy play, he had a milkshake in front of him. And here comes Hendrix blaring away, amps way up to the top, and he spills this milkshake all over him. He couldn't believe that nobody had signed this guy up before.
You knew that you had to make people pay attention to what you were doing through publicity, through performance on stage. You wanted to get people to notice him.
When Chas Chandler came into Cafe Wha in about April of '66, he was saying what Jimmy did stood out the most. He did a lot of things that were called, in the white show business world, showboating, that is, showing off. But in the R&B world, I mean, Albert Collins had a 80-foot guitar lead, so Albert Collins could wind his way through the crowd. T-Bone Walker played the electric guitar behind his head, you know, with the back of the guitar facing the audience and the strings facing that way, and could play along with the band, taking a solo, not just hitting chords. But with the white world, had never seen it. And Chas Chandler made a great point talking to me one day when I asked him about why did you just take Hendrix? He said, well, it's a bit like Elvis. He said, Elvis was really sexy on stage, but a really polite guy off stage, a sweet southern boy. He said, same thing with Hendrix. He said, when I saw Hendrix and spoke to him afterwards, he was a wild guy on stage with these wonderful moves, but off stage he was, yeah, sure. Oh, you know Eric Clapton? Hey, you were in the Animals? Oh my God, you ever meet the Beatles? And he said, I was struck how polite and nice Hendrix was. And he realized, I could be this guy's manager, take him to England and make him something.
Jimmy knew that a life as a backup musician offered him no challenge nor opportunity, and when he was offered the chance to relaunch his career as a pop rock sensation in the UK, he embarked for England. With nothing but his Fender Stratocaster, Jimmy landed in London, the pop universe where some of his favorite guitar heroes were leaving their own mark on rock and roll blues. It was time for his spot-stealing antics to make an electrifying return.
Chas Chandler had something like a dozen basses, mostly Fender electric basses, because he was the bass player of the Animals. And he sold them to get the Jimi Hendrix experience going. And he says, we gotta make a splash. So we're gonna play all these places like the Bag of Nails, Speakeasy. We're gonna play these clubs. Hendrix said, can you invite Eric Clapton? He says, I'm gonna invite all of them down. One of the advantages Hendrix had when he came to the UK, and I think Chas Chandler was a very wise man to bring him here, and probably knew this, is because Hendrix is African American, he's already hip to guys like Clapton and Beck and the Rolling Stones.
First times he had a chance to play for the English audience was with the Cream, and the Cream were just getting started out. Of course, Eric Clapton on lead guitar. And nobody had ever jammed with him before. I mean, it was just like, who is Jimi Hendrix and why does he want to jam with us?
There was a implicit understanding between Chas and Clapton that Jimmy could go up and jam with Clapton on stage. Clapton had only heard about him, never heard him play. And sure enough, the point of the gig came when Cream invited him on stage to join them. And Jimmy went up on stage and did Killing Floor, which was one of the most difficult numbers in Clapton's repertoire, something he hadn't properly conquered. Jimmy came up, started playing it, and wiped the face of the earth with it. Clapton quit after about 60 seconds into the song and just walked off stage. And Chas, who was standing next to me in the audience, turned to me and said, "Oh my God, we've upset him." So Chas then went backstage. And he told me about this later. He said, I went backstage, saw Eric. Eric was sitting on a case smoking a cigarette. And Chas said, "Are you okay, Eric?" Eric said, "You didn't tell me he was that bloody good, did you? Does he play anything else?" Chas said, "Oh yeah."
Within weeks of his arrival, Hendrix ignited the London scene with his exotic charm and gritty guitar playing.
It wasn't just a musical thing. Yes, it was chiefly that he was a dynamite guitar player, but they hadn't heard his songs yet. And what they had seen is he looked terrific. Archetypal rock star, dignified, wise-looking African-American dude. Not a no-nonsense kind of guy, but a warm guy. And then sexy. And he had the whole package right there. And he was already wearing his version of the psychedelic clothing of the day. So you had the two things, the dynamite guitar playing and the visual thing of his stage act and the way he performed, the way he dressed, the way he looked. So with just those two things, Chas Chandler got him off the ground as an act in the UK.
Chas encouraged him to perform on stage and do these little tricks, one of which was a suggestion of mine. And Chas and I were sitting backstage, and Chas said, "We got all the press in tonight. You're a journalist, Keith, come on, how do we steal all the headlines?" And I said, "Well, you can't keep smashing a guitar. People are going to get wise to the fact that it's just a repetition of what the Who are doing. It's a shame you can't set fire to the guitar." The act, the showmanship, were a part of Chas getting him in the front line, getting press attention and publicity. Then you could lead them to the fact that he happened to be technically brilliant as well. And his other problem with Jimmy, of course, was to get him to sing, because he didn't sing. And that's how he got him to kind of front the Jimi Hendrix experience, as it were.
Chandler teamed Jimi Hendrix with Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding, forming the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Chandler had them record Hey Joe, the song he heard Hendrix play the first time he met him in Café Wah. The chemistry between them as band members later helped Hendrix. The plan quickly gained a lot of traction, catapulting Hendrix into the spotlight. Hey Joe spent 10 weeks on the UK charts, topping out at number 6 in early 1967.
I'm going on to shoot my old lady. You know, I'm gonna mess around with another man. I'm going on to shoot my old lady. You know, I'm gonna mess around with another man, and that ain't too cool. Hey, Joe, I said, I heard you shot your woman down, you shot her down now. Hey, Joe, I heard you shot your woman down, you shot her down.
I think I very swiftly realised that Jimmy had abilities far beyond a jazz guitarist when he got the experience around him. Noel Redding and Mitch Mitchell are often kind of like dismissed as sidemen. They were much more important than that. They were a part of this package that focused attention upon Jimmy and set him in a beautiful diamond-like setting. Chas was quite instrumental in this as well, because he knew that if you went to America as a black artist launched from England, you were not going to get plays on certain radio stations in the 1960s because they had this racial policy of only playing black music on black stations, white music on white stations. But he was clever, because he realised if he's got two white men on that stage with him and him, they can't make out that he's just a black artist. It was a part of the plan, it wasn't just a coincidence.
Where you gonna run to now? Where you gonna go? Hey Joe, I said, where you gonna run to now? Where you gonna go? I'm going way down south, way down to Mexico way.
Hey Joe, by everybody else, is a fast song. Hendrix slowed it down into a blues, but it was just a starting point. I mean, while it's a blues and it's moody and it's great, and a lot of people learn to play it on the guitar because it's a fairly easy chord structure, it was just a very small signpost or warning of what was to come. Very small.
The success inspired them to head back to the studio, where they made what is now one of the most groundbreaking rock albums of all time. Are You Experienced, a one-of-a-kind psychedelic compilation with tracks like The Wind Cries Mary, Purple Haze, marked by apocalyptic riffs with lavish sound effects and brazen guitar playing.
So the first album that came out was Are You Experienced? A mind-boggling record. No one had heard anything like this before. We'd already had some psychedelia with Cream and the Yardbirds, and we're hinting at what's coming on in rock and roll music, but this took it a whole step and a half further. Are You Experienced was a groundbreaking record.
During Are You Experienced, with a newspaper up, suddenly Jimmy would play something in the studio. Chaz would go, "What was that? Play that again." Jimmy would go back over it and play it. "That's fantastic. Use that. Let's do that." Quite often Jimmy had plagiarized it from somewhere, but then all musicians do that. But he then adapted it to his own particular style. But there were bits and pieces that he took everywhere. He really was a musical magpie.
Everybody wanted to play guitar by '67, and a lot of it was because of Hendrix. And more guys and girls knew how to play Purple Haze. I have heard that more times at jam sessions, in school hallways, after school, and at concerts in the late '60s, early '70s than I ever want to hear again. That, I know Hendrix would blanch at that, but that dun, dun, it's just an octave. E, 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 E. That's his most famous riff.
Overnight, the Jimi Hendrix Experience became one of the most popular and highest-grossing touring acts in the world.
Acts like Jimi Hendrix were so different that when he came on the scene, he just exploded. I mean, everybody went crazy. I went crazy. He was so new and different, and he was so magnetic on stage. I mean, he just controlled the audience. And it was an exciting time.
He differed from the top acts at that time. And I mean, his sound was so different than the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or something like that. And plus, I think being an African American in both the American audience and the English audience was a plus in his favor. I mean, there weren't any African American guitar players at that time playing rock and roll to a white audience and getting the respect and appreciation that he did, you know? I think it was just a wild ride around the world, non-stop meeting people, meeting groupies, and having a blast.
Axis Bold as Love was the Experience's second album, an instant hit that would lodge itself in the charts for yet another lengthy stay.
Axis Bold as Love had a great variety of songs on it. I mean, you'd have a bit of R&B going to jazz influences by Mose Allison, and of course the occasional freak-out song coming in here and there.
I think by the time Jimmy arrived at Axis Bold as Love, his second album, he was beginning to fulfill himself. He was beginning to please himself more, and he was taking more initiative away from Chaz and the studio.
There were some beautiful melodies in there. I mean, Hendrix touched on his influences from Curtis Mayfield, like with Little Wing there, that great falsetto voice of him trying to imitate Curtis there.
It's a crazy, out there album. It had a terrific song on it called If 6 Was 9, which Peter Fonda pulled off the album to be on the soundtrack of Easy Rider, which was the first rock movie where someone thought, I can't afford a soundtrack, so I'll just put my record collection to the music. And when the Easy Rider soundtrack sold several million copies, not just because of the popularity of the movie, but because people loved the compilation that Peter Fonda did, he got a nice check for If 6 Was 9 because it was not only on a hit record called Axis Bold as Love, it was on this marvelous Easy Rider soundcheck, so he got some big bucks from that.
By 1968, Hendrix had taken greater control over the direction of his music with his double album, Electric Ladyland. He spent time in his recording studio, Electric Lady Studios, in New York City, pushing the potential of the consoles in the studio with each turn of a knob or flick of the switch, bringing clarity to his vision.
I remember talking to him briefly on the phone once in New York. I said, how's the recording going, Jimmy? He said, oh, well, you know me. He said, it's the time factor. He said, I was in a cab yesterday and like 3 months ago, in a cab 3 months ago, and this guy said to me, he recognized me and said, what are you doing, Jimmy? And I said, I'm recording my own studio in Electric Ladyland. And he said, oh, really? I'm a drummer. Jimmy, oh, God, yeah. Oh, really? Yeah. And he said he told me this whole sob story about how he was out of work and kids needed help and support and he didn't have any money. So I invited him to come along and jam with me in the studio. It took me 3 weeks to get rid of him. Couldn't get him out of the studio.
In the UK, it initially came out with a lot of naked women on the cover. When I say naked, I mean topless. You know, it wasn't totally vulgar. And it's just a classic. Electric Ladyland is, of course, though, the one where the psychedelic bag that Hendrix has been in is starting to break. He's starting to get out of the mold. You just start to hear it. He does that marvelous cover of All Along the Watchtower by Bob Dylan that everyone is so influenced by. So influential is that song that Dylan does that version today. Dylan doesn't do his version. He pays homage to Hendrix with the Hendrix-style version when you see Bob live.
Electric Ladyland, it was Jimmy's chance to stretch out in the studio. Here's a double album, his first double album. And of course, I mean, there was some great extended jams in there. I don't know if it was quite the album that he really wanted to have come out completely. He was unsatisfied with the sound. He really wanted this three-dimensional sound where music would come at you at what later developed as quadraphonic sound. And they're still developing it now with a 5-to-1 digital sound. But the music was great, and it was just an opportunity for Jimmy to really bring in some of his friends like Steve Winwood, Jack Cassidy from Jefferson Airplane, and just have a great time. And that was probably one of his best out recordings ever.
During the recording of Electric Ladyland, Chaz Chandler called Hendrix and said, I can't deal with this anymore. I'm throwing up my hands here. You make me want to scream.
It was the album, I think, that saw the end of the relationship between Jimmy and Chaz Chandler.
Chandler sold his share of the management company to Mike Jeffrey. Hendrix went from a disciplined recording regimen to an improvised chaos that agitated his reputation as an image-focused performer and wildly innovative musician. The effects of these events can be reflected in the musical style of the album that indicated Jimmy's relentless need to divert and escape whatever image his fans would make of him.
Chaz said to Jimmy, you cannot have these people around you, these dealers, and these people that are wasting your life away for you, financially and emotionally and physically.
When Chaz sat down with Hendrix and said, I can't go on like this. We've got to straighten this up and get rid of some of these hangers-on. We need to do this, this, and this. To his surprise, Hendrix said, no, this is me, this is my new direction, this is what we're doing. So they had a parting of the ways.
He knew that losing Chaz would be very important to him because Chaz had been the guy who'd stood by him in the really difficult times, sold his guitars to get him to England. He knew he could trust him. Whereas he couldn't trust Mike Jeffries, but he was contracted to Mike Jeffries and he was frightened of him.
There are different reports that he had possibly connections to the Mafia. Several people have told me that the concert at Madison Square Garden, the final Band of Gypsies concert, that Michael Jeffrey possibly slipped Jimmy some bad acid. He played 3 songs, actually kind of had a problem with a heckler in the audience, and just that 3rd song just collapsed, dissolved.
I mean, there was at one point, Jimmy was kidnapped in America. Mike Jeffries mysteriously found him and had him rescued. The suggestion was that Mike Jeffries also had him kidnapped, which is how he knew where he was, which got him further in debt to Mike Jeffries emotionally. And he already had him in debt to him financially and indeed contractually. So he couldn't move, and when Chaz said, well, look, it's either them or me, Jimmy took the easy way out.
There's a lot of darkness that needs light shed on it in this element of Jimmy's career. but we'll never know. He died over Spain around 73 in a mid-air crash or explosion.
Hendrix was an obsessive perfectionist in the studio who would do retake after retake until it was done to his perfection. He pushed the potential of the amplifier as a musical instrument both in the recording studio and on stage.
I mean, the primary thing about Jimi Hendrix and the way that he changed popular music was that he was a guitarist, the like of which nobody had heard before.
Well, he represented it. I mean, his music, the way I guess he lived, you know, on stage, it was real free, the way he played. No show was the same.
People that went to see him play at one point at the club, the Bag of Nails, all the superstars of the time, the Eric Claptons, came to listen to him. And they all went away absolutely staggered. In fact, I bumped into Townsend leaving that club. I said, "What do you think, Pete?" And he said, "I'm going to concentrate on songwriting." And he meant it. It meant there was no point in pursuing some kind of excellence on the guitar anymore, because Jimi Hendrix was so far in advance of anybody else, nobody was going to catch him.
There's an element of Hendrix, he's sort of a Dadaist in the Dada art movement. He just does what he does because he feels like doing it. It's absurd, and it shows how absurd life is. And it kind of brings a mirror up to his audience and allows them to look into the mirror and say that they're kind of absurd. I think he did things in the moment, and he did things because he wanted to, and there was not a lot of thought behind it. I didn't mean that in a nice way. I mean it because he felt it in his heart that it's time to play blues. And Hendrix was an improviser. Hendrix is a big, big improviser. When you see like Foxy Lady or Purple Haze or Burning the Midnight Lamp on a live album and you play them back to back with a studio version, well, they start and stop the same, but in the middle it's up for grabs because he was a brilliant improviser. Example, Martin Luther King is assassinated and a lot of people canceled their tours. The Experience is on the road in the United States, and they went on stage the next night, I think it was Chicago, and Noel Redding told the most wonderful story. He said, we walked on stage, Jimmy said a few words about the death of Martin Luther King, and he just started playing by himself. He didn't look at me or Mitch. He started playing this, and we looked at each other, and they just came in. A sort of a slow, bluesy kind of jammy thing. And Noel said we played this beautiful, like 6 or 7 minute piece of instrumental music we'd never played in our lives. We just joined in with Jimmy, and after a few minutes of us playing, Jimmy turned around and gave us a smile like, thanks guys, this is what I wanted. And they finished, and then Jimmy sort of nodded and said something and did the show. But that's Hendrix, that's our guy. That's what he felt at the moment, so let's do it. If I don't feel like burning or smashing my guitar, I'm not going to do it.
I think there was always that deep spirituality, especially in gospel, rooted deep into him. And he spoke about that a lot of times too. He wanted his music to be called sky church music, and to his concerts to be more kind of like a revival where people wouldn't just sit there and listen, that they would actually get up and dance and be part of the music and maybe even bring their own instruments and jam along.
There was instant acclaim from his peer group, the musicians that were other guitarists that knew what was going on. And as soon as they heard him, they went, wow, you've got to see this guy, he's something else. I remember going to see Sting, who was another of my clients as a PR later on, in Perugia, doing a jazz concert. And he adopted and played Little Wing. He was a great Jimi Hendrix fan, Sting. And I sat in the sound check, and they did this number on stage, and I thought, oh, here we go, somebody's going to try and be Jimi Hendrix. And the guitarist that he had on stage was doing a fantastic job. I thought, where the hell has he found him from? He's amazing. He sounds just like Jimmy, you know? Then I realised he got another guitarist on stage. It took 2 guitars to replace Jimi Hendrix.
But with becoming the highest-earning rock musician of the 60s came a gradual loss of control. To cope with the pressures of touring and the overwhelming power of fame, Hendrix started to rely on drugs and alcohol. His onstage guitar theatrics and offstage mystique only made his reputation larger and his fans more ardent.
You've got to understand, it was different times. It was a lot less sober times than they are today. And kids like myself would experiment with different things. I mean, pot was everywhere. LSD in the 60s and the flower days with Haight-Ashbury was everywhere. And at the beginning, it was a great thing. It was just a great way to experiment and expand on your music. Unfortunately, that initial interest started to fade out, and harder drugs came on the scene, And I think there was a little bit more of an edge that came on the music in '68 and especially '69.
He was looking for directions the whole time and not finding them, because large of the time his brain was addled from these drugs that he was taking.
Being associated with coming across the border with heroin in your flight bag put a different image on him and his fans, although I would say probably the hardcore fans maybe were a lot more forgiving on that. But, you know, heroin wasn't the drug at the time. Cocaine was just starting to rear its ugly head, and he admitted that he had tried cocaine several times.
And you can burn yourself out very quickly doing that kind of thing, and also come to grief quite quickly doing it as well. You might get a little quick, short burst of inspiration of some sort, but it's not very long term. And the effect upon your physical well-being and mental well-being is quite disastrous in the long term.
Despite the success of his records and numerous tours, Hendrix's personal life was fragile. He was constantly surrounded by individuals who craved for a piece of his success, draining him mentally and physically. The things he would have to endure as one of the highest-paid rock acts of the late 1960s would soon take their toll.
When you met him, he was very softly spoken, very timid off stage. Not at all the kind of character that people saw when they went to a concert where he threw himself around, played guitar with his teeth, set fire to his guitar.
He was a disciplined young man by his father, Al Hendrix. He said yes and no and please and thank you. Just a really sweet, nice guy. But if you're from an impoverished, low-income background and the money starts rolling in, you don't really question where it came from. And Hendrix was no exception to that rule. The money was coming in. He knew he was rolling in the dough. Unfortunately, when you're rolling in the dough, the vultures come out, and there's a lot of speculation as to what was going on with Hendrix.
He was paranoid. He didn't really want to play these shows to these rock concerts and get back home to the States and settle back down with his family. So the band is dissolved. Yet the contracts still required him to play Paris and Belgium and possibly even Japan, and so there was that pressure on them there too. Meanwhile, the record companies are demanding new product. You know, there hasn't been this fourth studio album that they've been promised in a year. So a lot of things are overdue.
Hendrix was not immune to being hit up by ridiculous demands of various people in the shady undergrowth of the financial world.
Michael Jeffrey kept a tight leash on Jimi Hendrix. He was his cash cow. The original experience, the three-piece band, was what sold posters, what sold records, 45s, LPs, eventually cassette tapes later on. And that was the moneymaker. That was the money. Unfortunately, Jimmy never saw that money and had to ask Michael Jeffrey and other people in the company for allowances, like a little kid. Michael, can I have $500 for this weekend to go out and play and do what I want to have and have some fun, you know? And I don't think Jimmy at the time really knew where this money was going. All these thousands of dollars that were made at these concerts and other appearances was just disappearing. Unfortunately, Jimmy wasn't a really good businessman either. I mean, he'd sign a contract here and there, and, you know, drugs were flowing freely. So there wasn't really a way at that time, unfortunately, for him to keep an accurate record where his money was going.
It's sad that Hendrix, the greatest grossing, most money-generating rock star of this period in the 1960s, right? He's number one. We had his finances in such a mess.
The demands of touring and studio work took its toll on the group, and in 1969 the Experience had disbanded. Legal complications from an old contract predating his British sojourn froze his recording royalties, necessitating constant touring to pay the bills, and his audiences were reluctant to allow him to progress beyond the musical blueprint of his earliest successes.
Jeffrey went out of his way to make life difficult for Hendrix. He would book him in Toronto one night, and then he'd have him booked in Miami, and then the next night he'd do one night in California, and he kept him exhausted, he kept him dependent, and he kept him under control.
As a musician, he was one city to the next, no place to call home, no family life to speak of, no really permanent or long-lasting relationship in his future.
Hendrix, while he's a unique figure in rock music, does have certain things in his background and his history which are common throughout the history of rock and roll. I mean, he had an unstable family home. He was more interested in the art than keeping the ledger and the book straight, so he didn't really know what was going on financially in his own career. And these are common things in rock and roll and pop music. People focus on their music and they're enjoying all the attention and the adulation, and there's the opposite sex is interested in them, and the press says they're a guru or a god or both. Hendrix is typical of that.
He was easygoing to the point where he really was too easygoing. You know, he would be whatever you wanted him to be. I mean, in his struggling days, it was more understandable than later. And it caused Chaz an enormous amount of trouble later that he had all these contracts around that he'd signed over his rights for record production, recording, artists, etc., etc. Chaz had to get him out of all those contracts.
Hendrix was frustrated by legions of white fans who only saw him as a racial stereotype instead of a serious musician.
While the UK has racial tensions, they're obviously nothing like mid-60s America. And it's interesting to note that Noel Redding and Mitch Mitchell have both said they didn't feel they were in a band with a black guy, as most Americans, white Americans would have. They felt they were in a band with a Yank. We would go here and we'd go there and we'd think, yeah, we're playing with an American. And Noel Redding said, but when we stopped in Louisiana to get some fuel for the truck, Jimmy wouldn't leave the car to go into the rural Louisiana shop to get a drink. You know, white-owned petrol station. And Noel Redding said, that was when I realized in England, Jimmy was an American. But once we went to the States, particularly down south, he was a black man.
Hendrix may have been the first black sex symbol American whites embraced. At a time when a black man could be killed for being with a white woman, Hendrix was surrounded by white groupies, flicking his tongue and grinding his guitar before thousands of cheering white girls.
Hendrix united white and black American pop music audiences in the way that few people have.
I don't know how bad the racial problem was in England for Jimmy, but certainly it was there in America. When I flew out to America with Jimmy for the Monterey Festival, he had 3 chances of not getting a cab in New York in those days, in the early 60s. 1 of you had long hair, 2 of you were black, and 3 of you were hippie. Jimmy made it on all 3 counts. So not only would they not stop, they'd try and run him over. I used to have to hide him in a doorway and then step out and hail the cab. And then I would get him into the cab, and the cab driver would start in with, "What's that piece of shit you got in the back of my cab?" I think you should drive to the nearest police station and we'll have a little chat about civil rights. Don't you tell me what I can do and what I can't do in my own cab. Right? Jimmy, meanwhile, was pulling me out of the cab by my arm. I want to have a go at this guy. And he gets me out on the pavement and the cab shoots off. He said, "Keith, do me a favour. Don't do me any favours. I've been taking this shit all my life. I know how to cope with it. You don't. Did you see his gun? No, I did. Just leave it to me. The next time we come back here, they'll be begging for my autograph." And they were.
After 67, you basically went to see white guys play, or you went and saw black guys play. It split. Hendrix brought that back together. The African-American audience embraced him because he was so crazy and out there and so obviously African in his musical taste. He'd heard Ornette Coleman. He'd heard John Coltrane. You could hear it in his music. They heard it in his music. But he also had that 4/4 rock and roll thing, and the white community was there as well.
Hendrix's growing popularity saw him headline the Woodstock Music Festival on August 18, 1969. Jimmy joined forces with an eclectic ensemble called Gypsy Sun and Rainbows. A combination of unfortunate events delayed his appearance, and many fans had left the festival before he even came on stage. Despite this, Hendrix delivered a historic performance of the Star-Spangled Banner that was somewhat controversial as the Vietnam War was underway, and as a result, it was interpreted by some as a political gesture. Hendrix summoned the sounds of falling rockets and bursting bombs from his guitar.
By 68, 69, especially after his appearance at the Woodstock, which is probably the apogee, of his career, it's become a kind of icon, in rock and roll history. He was really ready to become the #1, rock act in the United States.
In 68 and 69, there were a lot of protests in the streets, and there was a lot of interest in Hendrix joining in a lot of political events and peace rallies and things like that. And at that point, I think that was the tipping point, the shifting part where Hendrix started to realize that, well, it's not so much the quick AM pop tunes that interest him anymore, and he didn't really care where his music was going chart-wise. It was more trying to reach people's souls and give them some sort of direction and information in the music that he was more interested in.
Because of Hendrix's fame, a number of people like Malcolm X here in the UK went to him and wanted him to become more involved in a pro-Black Britain cause or causes. And a lot of these people become, through their music and their iconic status as a musician or a countercultural figure, sort of political heroes. But Hendrix was it's important to know this, Hendrix was a political conservative. He was not a rabid Molotov cocktail throwing Marxist. Backstage here in London, I've had a few people who heard this story, told me this. People talking about the Vietnam War and the tragedy of Vietnam, and Hendrix jumped up because he was in the 101st Paratroopers who were fighting in Vietnam at the time. He'd been in that very unit 4 or 5 years earlier. He jumped up and said, if Vietnam falls to the commies, well, then the rest of Southeast Asia is going to go communist, which is, of course, the domino theory, which is why America got involved in Vietnam. Hendrix believed in the domino theory. He was no rabid left-wing Marxist, and it's ridiculous to say that he was. He was not. A lot of people, when you become an iconic figure in rock and roll, a lot of people put things upon you.
I think an awful lot of things were read into Jimmy's music which were not necessarily his intentions. But like many other artists of that period, like Bob Dylan and things, they were mirrors. You know, they didn't set trends, they saw trends and mirrored that trend back to the people who they were playing to. I don't think that it was his intention ever to interfere with people's belief systems. But other people read into his music and into his lyrics quite often an idealism that was not actually there. The Black Panther movement tried to get hold of him at great length. And he did do a little kind of like surreptitious work on him, but his heart wasn't in it. He wasn't really a political animal at all. He was a musical animal, and he wanted his music to speak for itself.
Hendrix formed an all-black group, Band of Gypsies, with Cox and drummer Buddy Miles intending to accentuate the African-American dimension in his music. The trio made its debut on the 31st of December 1969, but its potential was marred by Miles' flat, pedestrian drumming and unimaginative compositions. Part of the set was issued as Band of Gypsies, but despite the inclusion of the exceptional Machine Gun, this inconsistent album was only released to appease former manager Chaplin, who acquired the rights in part settlement of a miserly early contract.
Jimmy eventually went to all his mates and the perhaps better musicians for the Band of Gypsies, but he would never have got that band off the ground if he'd have started with that in the way that he did with the Experience.
Band of Gypsies wasn't an entirely deathly serious project. He recorded a weekend at the Fillmore, had this gold record, everyone's happy. After this point, the records that come out, as brilliant as they are, they're all slightly a hodgepodge of tracks previously recorded by Hendrix at different points. Yes, Hendrix signed off and approved The Cry of Love, but by the time it came out, he died. And it was really a pretty sloppy job. In many cases, some of those albums in the 70s and into the early 80s, they had re-recorded backing tracks. Well, what's up with that? We want to hear what went down in the studio when Jimmy was there. We don't want to hear new drums and bass overdub.
Did some great concerts at the Fillmore East and some wonderful recordings, but it wasn't the experience. It wasn't the Jimi Hendrix experience. What's sold in America, was sold all around the world.
When he sort of formed Band of Gypsies, he kind of moved himself away from the rock media mentality quite a lot, and not really getting it together with the musicians that he was working with. You know, he had more freedom, but it wasn't producing a direction.
The Band of Gypsies broke up after a mere 3 concerts, and initially Hendrix confined his efforts to completing his Electric Ladyland recording studio. He then started work on another double set, the unreleased First Rays of the New Rising Sun, and later resumed performing with Cox and Mitchell.
He was floundering, and he knew that his music was losing momentum in terms of its commerciality.
In the beginning, there were a few white critics in some of the rock magazines that totally didn't understand it and said, well, what are you doing, you know? get back to the original format. And that's what Michael Jeffrey did in 1970. He took an attempt to reform the original experience with Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding, and did an interview with Rolling Stone magazine in February of 1970, saying that here they are, they're back together again, you know, like the Beatles, the Monkees, they're back together again, kids. And here they're going out on the States, they're going around the world, and buy your concert tickets now.
Jimmy's final stage performance was at the Isle of Firmen Festival in Germany, where a riot atmosphere exploded. The mob ruled and the Germans robbed the box office. Jimmy and his band fled in terror. Jimmy, Mitch, and Noel were smuggled out of the venue that was crushed by a mob of fans. His final concerts were largely frustrating, as the aims of the artist and the expectations of his audience grew increasingly separate.
It was billed as this, again, like Woodstock, this love and peace festival. And the posters at the time reflect that. But when they arrived, there was a storm going on. There was total chaos in front of the stage and behind the stage. When he got on stage, I mean, he was booed. You know, here's Jimi Hendrix, you know, one of the top acts on this 3-day festival, and he's booed on stage, and he had words with the crowd. But he went into a very short set, was anxious to get off stage. I mean, people were throwing things at him. When they started to pack up the group, and the roadies were getting things together, he was threatened with a knife backstage. One of the roadies was threatened with a knife backstage. The Hells Angels at the time burned the stage down. So it was total chaos and confusion. I mean, the hippy-dippy thing had died and moved on, and here was these hippies at the time that were a little bit harder edged than what had happened in the 67, 68 period.
Hendrix had commented several times to people that he didn't think he'd live to a ripe old age. He said, I might be gone by the time I'm 28, and he wasn't far wrong.
In the early morning hours of September 18, 1970, Jimmy was found dead in the basement apartment of the Smarkand Hotel, a tragic event that is widely disputed to this day.
Jimi Hendrix's death is something that people have conjectured about for ages. My knowledge of it, which is gleaned from people like Chaz and Eric Burden and people that were close to him, was that it was no more than an overdose of alcohol on the pills that he'd taken that night.
Some people say that Jimmy would probably want to go back to his hotel room at the Cumberland, but his black and white Strat, one of his favorite guitars, was at Monica's flat there, so he returned with her. You know, he was having a cold when he got to England and Germany. He was fighting that. He was tired. He hadn't slept for about 3 days. So he asked her if he could have one of her sleeping pills. And she was a ice skater at the time, and she had suffered some leg injuries. And so she had these this German brand of pills called Vesperex, which I believe had to be broken into quarters. And she gave Jimmy a pill. She thought he had just taken one pill. But these pills were scattered when she returned and were all over the floor, and she figured he had taken 9 pills. Now, there are a lot of conflicting reports. Monica's version of the story was that at about 10 o'clock in the morning, she got up out of sleep, was hungry, went to go get some breakfast, get a pack of cigarettes, and came back and noticed that Jimmy had been sick, that he'd vomited a little bit. There was a little bit of vomit by the side of his mouth, but really thought nothing of it. But after further observations, said, maybe I should call a doctor, Jimmy's doctor. She started looking in his phone book and tried to find the doctor, couldn't find the doctor. Further panic continued. She called Eric Burden, who was in town. Jimmy had just jammed with their new band called War. Called up Eric, reached his girlfriend, wife at the time, Alvina, and said, what do I do? What do I do? Should I call the doctor? If I call the doctor, the ambulance will show up, the press will show up, and Jimmy wouldn't want this at all. And panicked and hung up again. By this time, the second time she had called back, Eric was a little bit more awake and told her to, if there's anything illegal in the apartment, take it in the back, dump it, bury it, get rid of it right away, but call the ambulance right now. And she says she called the ambulance at about maybe quarter after 11. They showed up at about 11:27, 11:30. On the way to the hospital, according to Monica, the ambulance, the paramedics strapped Jimmy in an uncomfortable position where he choked on the way to the hospital and died at the hospital. However, in 1991, Dee Mitchell, Mitch Mitchell's wife, and Kathy Etchingham, his friend and lover for so many years, started an investigation. At about 5 o'clock, they determined that Hendrix had died. Jimi Hendrix had died at 5 o'clock, not on the way to the hospital. When the paramedics arrived at his apartment, they found him matted with vomit and red wine everywhere. And there was nobody else in the apartment. Monica wasn't there. She said she was there and accompanied Jimmy to the hospital. She wasn't there. When he arrived at the hospital, the doctor tried to revive him, tried to get rid of some of this vomit that he had obviously choked on, though. It was blocking his lungs and everything like that at the time. And he didn't realize who he was at first, but then later was told this was Jimi Hendrix. And they checked his pulse, tried to revive him. He had been dead, and probably had been dead for maybe close to 5 hours before an ambulance was called. And we will never know an actual, minute-by-minute accounting of what happened then.
Now, you may be able to say, with complete accuracy, Jimi Hendrix made a speech in 1969 and 1970 that was pro the Black Panthers, and therefore was a threat to the government. But I can assure you that unlike today, he could have made that speech several times and word wouldn't have gotten out. And there are those that say a Hendrix or a John Lennon was bumped off by the authority figures of the United States or the United States government or the CIA. And I don't believe that for a second any more than I believe the Mafia would bump off a guy like Jimi Hendrix. It's like bumping off Frank Sinatra. I mean, you're killing the cash cow.
If there was a conspiracy surrounding his death, I think it was only that which was engendered by the fact that people who were anxious to protect his image had cleaned up the flat, taken out any suspicious substances. The rest of it, I think, is a nonsense. The tales of CIA conspiracies and people that wanted him dead, I think it's just a nonsense. He was just another victim of a drug overdose.
I want to believe that it was accidental. I mean, I don't think it was suicide. From the people I interviewed at the time, Chaz Chandler and everybody, he said he was so positive and wanted to do this. I mean, yeah, there were some difficulties at the time, but I don't know. I tend to believe that he wanted to go back to New York, get his tapes, work with Chaz Chandler, finish this final album, and take care of these paternity suits, get out of his contract with Michael Jeffrey, and move on. Take this music to a newer height.
Dying so suddenly also meant that he left behind a large stockpile of works in progress that were eventually edited and completed by others. Scores of Jimi Hendrix were released posthumously, most of which Hendrix would have completely disavowed.
Now, since he's died, there's been a multiplicity of reissues of Jimi Hendrix music. Some of those haven't been very good, but that's the chroniclers, the reissue chiefs of his career. That's their fault, not his fault. Everything he did in his life is valid. And I think it's allowed him to be the sort of James Dean syndrome of James Dean made 3 major Hollywood films. Each one's a classic. He never made a bad film. Hendrix will never be associated with a bad movement or a bad record.
Since his death, over 2 million records of his music have been sold yearly. The Experience Hendrix Company has made more than $44 million from recordings and merchandising.
It's only been the last 15 or so years that the Hendrix family has really gotten on top of the situation and cleaned up the tracks and released them as we hope and think Hendrix wanted them to come out. Al Hendrix took the family together and they said, we've got a name here, we're going to build up this brand, we're going to get some fancy pants lawyers and sort all these problems out, we're going to get all these contracts sorted out, we're either going to pay this guy his percentage or we're going to pay him off against future royalty earnings and get it together.
For Hendrix, the thunderous drama of his hard rock band was but a fraction of what he aspired to. He wanted to return to his jazz roots, compose more complex ensembles, as he grew tired of improvising endlessly in front of a rhythm section for audiences waiting for him to smash or burn his guitar. Still, in his all-too-brief career, he managed to combine and extend the soaring improvisational transcendence of John Coltrane, the rhythmic virtuosity of James Brown, the bluesy intimacy of John Lee Hooker, the lyrical aesthetic of Bob Dylan, the bare-knuckle onstage aggression of The Who, and the hallucinatory studio fantasias of the Beatles.
His music evolved, although fans and managers weren't catching up to where Jimmy was going. Had he had a chance to live and evolve that music and maybe get into playing with some of his friends like Miles Davis and expanding on a jazz scene and a different type of funk groove at that time, I think the rest of us would have caught up with him. But he was at that range where, you know, it was either going to fall apart or it was going to evolve into something entirely different.
I think Jimmy sensed that maybe there was too much philosophical intent going on in a lot of rock music at that time, particularly in America. And I think he thought that he should get back to simplicity and just be a musician and appeal to the emotions more rather than looking for something outside your own sphere of activity.
Towards the end of his life, as he leaves the psychedelic bag, and really the rock world, he's jamming with, you know, jazz players, and he played with Miles Davis, and he had people back to Electric Ladyland that played vibes or saxophone. I mean, I don't think Hendrix would have stayed with 4/4 rock and roll at all. And that's one of the reasons he's considered so important today, so groundbreaking today. And Hendrix is always going to stand out from his contemporaries. He's forever young.
His uncanny musical abilities are without question, and despite his lack of musical training, Hendrix's sense of melody and composition transcended all boundaries and solidifies his mark as one of the most influential artists of the 20th century. As a gifted musician, Jimmy pioneered an all-embracing musical exposure that went beyond all known genre barriers. As a relentless artist, his boundless imagination blended experimental sounds with poetic lyrics and an electro-musical spirituality. The enormous legacy Jimi Hendrix left behind suggests that perhaps 4 years are long enough to redefine the history of music forever, giving it a soulful sound that is kept forever trapped in amber.